All right, so I have a question for you guys. I'm thinking about this question a little bit. All right, try though. All right. If, if I asked Christian to go and pick up a puppy for me because I bought a puppy, and not from a puppy farm though. Let's just say I got it from the pound because I'm a responsible person. Okay. And so I'm like, but I got to work. Can you go get the puppy for me? And then on his way to pick up the puppy, he gets in a car accident. Okay. It's, you know, he's still alive. No, it's a minor accident, but he causes some damage. Okay. Geez, dude, why did it turn dark? It's his fault. Completely his fault. All right. So the question is, because he was running an errand for me, do I bear any liability for his actions? What? Okay. 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 So capacity may be a factor here. And what we mean by capacity is the legal ability to act for yourself, right? Older teenagers are like in this weird middle place, right? Like they're allowed to drive and the state licenses them to drive. So they have to have some responsibility of their own, but their parents are probably still legally liable for damage they do if they can't pay for it, right? All right, what were you going to say, Christian? Okay. So there may be a difference between the nature of our relationship may matter. If you're conducting company business, instead of picking up a puppy, I'm like, go pick up that load of lumber. We need to build this house or something. And now you're driving the business vehicle, then I might bear the liability, right? Or even if he was driving his private vehicle, but he was on the clock for me, right? Okay, so I think so. What we're these are important distinctions, and I think hopefully, if like you've learned anything so far, that in law, a lot of times these little minor distinctions matter, right? Just like, you know, did I make a warranty when I said that this was a really great product? Well, no, but what if I said this product will, you know, strip the paint off of your house within 3 hours? Well, then I did. I made a very, you know, so one was a specific promise, whereas one was just talking the product up. And those minor differences in what I do change the legal standing of a situation. So this chapter is on something called agency. And agency, for some people, it sounds like a religious term, maybe, but for others, we're like, what does that even mean? Does anybody know what an agent is? What's an agent? Like a secret agent? Okay, yeah. What's an agent? Really any. Okay. An agent or a free agent, right? What's the difference? Or you may have a free agent may mean you have all of the options, right? Whereas if you're an agent, it means you are linked to one specific team and they could sell your contract, but you can't choose it, right? But a free agent can choose between teams. So if you're not a great player, free agency always isn't always a great thing for you. But if you're a really great player, then free agency is usually great for you because now the other teams start bidding for you, right? So okay, so there's one sense of the term agent. What were you going to say? Okay, so when we talk about agency from a legal sense, we are talking about being bound to another, and specifically bound in such a way that you have the authority to act in the other's name. Okay. So am I an agent of Eastern Arizona College? Probably, right? I act in their name. When you come here, I represent them. And so if I say something, you know, horribly offensive, let's not say offensive, something, let's say I attack a protected uh, class of people, I say something like racist or something. or I behave in a racist way. You know, I'm going to treat one group of students different than another group of students. And you report that to the college. Probably if the college responds immediately by coming to me, you know, punishing me in some way, they don't necessarily have to fire me, but they could give me a written warning or something that says this is not acceptable. Then that's all the college has to do in that first situation to kind of to be like, we're not liable for this person's actions, they are. But if I continue to do it and the college just ignores it, then now they're liable for my actions too, because they're allowing me to continue with this agent relationship where I represent them. The idea is if I represent somebody and they don't correct my behavior, then really what I'm doing also means they're doing it, right? So there's a couple terminology or a couple terms that I want to start with just to make us familiar with some of the concepts here. Agency law is pretty specific, and again, most lawyers know a little bit about it, but like there's others who become experts in this one part of law, and it's very business oriented. So an agency relationship is one in which one party agrees to act on behalf of another. Okay. So a sales clerk, they're acting on behalf of the store. They're collecting money for them and giving refunds if they have the authority to do that, right? A principal, see, it's spelled the same way as like your high school principal, because he's your pal or she. And that's the party for whom the agent acts. And then the agent is the party who acts for another. So what's interesting is the principal of a school is actually an agent for the school district, but also is the senior leader of that organization, and all of the other agents, in this case, the teachers and the vice principals and all of them, they report to that one. So they're the principal agent. Okay, they're the in that case, the school is the principal, and then the principal is the principal agent. In other words, they control all of the other agents. Does that make sense? So it's an interesting thing. Oops, did I forget one? No. All right, so this is some pretty old sounding terminology, but they still use it in a legal sense. So there's a couple different types of agency relationships, and the first is called legally a master-servant relationship. And what that means is that the principal has a great deal of control over the servant agent. And most of the time, that's the type of relationship between employers and employees. When you're a sales clerk at Pollock's Western Outfitters, what do they call themselves? Pollock's Western Outfitters? Okay, so when you act as a sales clerk or a customer service person, your boss has a great deal of authority. And what I mean by that is they could be like, hey, Bethany, we don't do it that way anymore. We're going to do it this way. And you kind of just have to comply. We're getting a new point of sale system. You're going to do it this way now. When you deal with customers, I need you to do this, this, and this, right? When you're training a new person on behalf. So you're an agent of Pollock's Western Outfitters toward this new person even. You are training them. And so is it reasonable for him to expect that the way you're training him is the way the bosses want stuff done? And so if they were to fire him, let's say, because he did it the way you trained him, but it wasn't the way they wanted, might he have some recourse and say, no, you trained me to do it this way. And they'll say, we didn't train you to do it this way. Bethany did. And he'd say, Bethany was representing you. Of course, he wouldn't say that. He'd just be like, whatever. But you see what I'm getting at? When somebody represents themselves as an agent of another, it's reasonable then for us to assume they have the authority to do what they're doing. And so that provides some legal ramifications. So the factors that control whether this type, so a master-servant relationship exists, would be the level of supervision, the level of control, the nature of the agent's work, the regularity of hours, and the length of employment. All of those things together, okay? And I could argue like the college doesn't exercise that much control over me. Like I pretty much come and go as I please. As long as I'm here for my classes, they don't care. But really, all the classes I teach, I have to submit a course design that's approved by the college. And then I'm supposed to teach according to that course design, right? I say I come and go as I please, but I had to write a plan at the beginning of the year that showed my schedule, and they had to approve that. So the fact that my comings and goings and the things I do are all approved would say this organization has a high degree of control over me and we're in a master-servant relationship, okay? Another type is called an independent contractor relationship. This is where I hire someone to perform a task, but I don't directly supervise them. Their example is a lawyer, right? If you hire a lawyer to represent you because Christian crashed into you while he was going to get my puppy, right? You wouldn't sit there and be like trying to supervise the lawyer all the time and tell them how to do their job. In fact, the reason you hired them is because they have expertise you don't have. And so you want them to represent you. And so even like say on a construction job, anybody ever worked construction at all? Like I have. It's like you have employees where the boss comes around and tells you, I need you to do this today. I need you to work on that today. And then you have independent contractors where the boss says, instead of just having my employee do this, I'm going to hire a company that does just electrical work. And I'm going to say, hey, I need you to do the electrical wiring on this house I'm building. And in that case, the boss doesn't stand there and, make sure you do all your work, and they don't they might just set some general parameters like, here's a deadline for this work to be done. And other than that, you're the expert on electrical work, so you work as the independent contractor. So recognize there's a difference between a master-servant relationship where I'm the boss and I'm telling you what to do in every aspect of the job, and an independent contractor relationship where I've hired you to do a job and now all the details are up to you. All right. So here's the three parts of agency law: the creating of an agency, the relationship between the principal and the agent, and the relationships between the agent and the principal and third parties. Because what really comes down to is if the agent makes an agreement or a contract with a third party, does that bind the principal or not? It's a little scary if your employee can bind you to a debt or something like that, right? So here at the college, there's only there's a whole policy in place. I'm trying to think. I think only the president of the college can bind the college to a debt. So if our vice president is working with, say, the company that owns Canvas and agrees to this contract that we're going to use Canvas for the next 5 years, we're going to pay $60,000 a year for it. So $300,000 contract for Canvas, she can't just sign off on it. She has to agree to it. And that's her job, okay, is to make those sorts of decisions about academic stuff. She's the vice president over all the academic stuff at the college. But then she still has to get it signed off on by the president, because only he's the only person who can act as an agent in that sense for the college. So sometimes we specifically limit how our agents, we say you can do this, this, and this, but you can't do this, this, and this. Does that make sense? But that's a little confusing to someone doing business with us, those third parties. They don't know who's authorized to sign that and who isn't. So that creates other legal issues. So how do we create an agency creation? So the first is what's called express authority agency. In other words, I hire somebody and give them the authority. I just say, you have authority to act for me now, right? And a lot of times it doesn't happen that bluntly. A lot of times it happens like they hire you and say, here's how you run the cash register. Here's how you stock the shelves, or whatever your job is. And so in essence, they're implying that they're giving you authority to do those things. So the first is express, created by the principal, stating or writing that the agency exists and what authority the agent has. So that's express authority. In order for that to work, the principal must have legal capacity. So the person giving authority to someone else has to have the ability to do that, have to be an adult, and have to have the mental capacity of doing that. So I can't claim, if I've got a nephew who has mental impairments, but he inherited $1 billion, I can't just start spending that and being like, I was acting as an agent on his behalf, even if I get him to sign a document saying I have the right to do that. Instead, we'd have to go to court, right? And court would have to be like, are you the best person to be the agent on this person's behalf? And that would then allow anybody else who thinks they should be the agent for the billionaire nephew to state their claim, and the court would decide. right? Who can do that? A lot of times an agency relationship, when you have a minor or someone who lacks capacity that's created by a court, is called a conservatorship. You may have heard that with like Britney Spears, right? Where her father was like her conservator because they were concerned about her mental health and they were afraid she was going to waste all her money or whatever. Now she's free of the conservatorship. So you go, Britney. Hopefully she doesn't blow all the money, right? All right. So let's see. So principal must have capacity. The other type of agency creation is the one I kind of hinted at a minute ago or mentioned, was implied authority, which is the extension of express authority by custom. In other words, it is normal for teachers to have the authority to work directly with students, assign students, give students their grades and so forth. And so the college doesn't write to me like specifically, you may do this part of it. It's just by custom, by the way we've always done that. That's the norm. And so it's reasonable for you as a student to also assume I have the authority of the college behind me, because that's normal custom, okay? So we can create an agency expressly or by implication or by implying it. And then the third way is what's called ratification. Let's say Sienna transact business on Bethany's behalf. She goes and, I don't know, buys a car for Bethany and signs the paperwork for the loan for Bethany. And then Bethany goes, what? Like that. That's about how you'd respond, I think. But then Bethany looks at the car and says, oh, I really like that car. I think, you know what? You're so good at picking these things, Sienna, like that. And then, and so she just decides, yeah. So she can sign off on it. And that's called ratification, which means like maybe Sienna didn't have the authority to act as an agent, but Bethany decided, I'll go ahead and accept that thing she did. Because that would be your choices at that point, either accept it or to go fight it, right? And if you fight it, then you got to go back to them and say, whoa, she didn't have authority to act in my name. And then they can either accept that and give you your money back or whatever, or fight you, and then it goes to court, right? And then they have to decide, did they have right to assume? And is Sienna responsible for this, or so and so forth? All right, so here's the principal-agent relationship. Agent has some responsibilities, which is really just to act in the principal's best interest. So when I'm representing the college in my limited level of agency, okay, I have to, the expectation legally would be that I would act in the best interest of the college. I wouldn't like do stuff to enrich myself and then pretend like I was representing the college in that. Does that make sense? Have you ever heard like when people are like federal agents, like an FBI agent or whatever? So they're agents of the federal government. They have the authority to act in some pretty aggressive ways, right? They could shoot you and have the protection of the government behind them. Now, the government may call them to report on if they were reacting prudently to a situation, but still, you know, think about that. An agent in that regard has the authority to kill people in the name of the government if the situation warrants it. All right. James Bond, they're licensed to kill, right? So the agent's responsibility is to act loyally or in the principal's best interest. The agent also has an obligation to be obedient. In other words, to do what the principal tells them to do. You can't have the principal tell you like, don't buy that car for me, and then you buy it anyway and expect protection under the law. At that point, you're no longer representing them. Does that make sense? And they have what's called a duty of care. In other words, if the agent says if the principal says buy a car for me, and you just buy the first one because you're lazy and don't want to check out the different options out there, then the principal could be like, you failed in your duty. You need to, again, realize you're representing me and use the appropriate amount of care. Okay. And then the principal, their duty is to pay. So if I bind them to buying a car, they need to pay for the car. That's their duty, okay? Or a duty to reimburse If I paid for it out of my own money, then they need to pay me back for it. Does that make sense? So if I travel on behalf of the college, I can do one of two things. I can either just pay for my travel and then have the college reimburse me, or I can, contract directly with the hotel I'm staying at, and then they'll bill the college and the college will pay them. So in either case, since I've had authority to travel at the college's behest, they have a duty either to pay that person or to reimburse me if I pay for it. So I hope what you're getting out of this, future business owners or managers, is when you create an agency relationship with somebody, that involves trusting them. And so early in the agency relationship, you might limit their behaviors, like a clerk, right? But think about it, your clerk at your store has the authority to handle money, to take money from customers on your behalf. And guess where a lot of businesses get theft happening? Cashiers steal from them. But it's a pretty easy one to check, because you start the drawer with a certain amount and you should be able to calculate how much is there. In fact, usually it's when theft happens, more often it's happening with like inventory. People are taking it out the back door. All right. So from a legal standpoint, here's the deciding factors are, was there a disclosed principal? So if I'm an agent and I'm acting on behalf of Pablo, and so I'm acting on behalf of you, you're my boss, okay? If I tell the person, the third party that I'm dealing with, hey, I am an agent for Pablo, then that's what's called a disclosed principal relationship, meaning the person I'm doing business with, third party, knows that it's not for me, but that I represent Pablo. I've disclosed that there's a principal, okay? So if I've disclosed the principal and I have actual authority, meaning the principal's given me the authority, then what I do is I bind a relationship between the principal and the third party. So if the third party knows I'm representing the principal, and I actually have authority from the principal to represent the principal, then I've created that relationship. Does that make sense? I've bound those two legally now, that they're going to pay each other or whatever they're doing. Okay. If the agent has apparent authority but not actual authority, so now is a situation where it would look like to the third party, I have the right to act on behalf of the principal, but I don't actually. The principal never gave me that authority. So I've disclosed there's a principal, and the third party believes that there's a principal and that I have the authority to act, but I don't. Now what's happened is I've bound the third party to the principal and the principal to the third party, but the principal can come after me for any of that money because I was acting on authority I didn't have. Okay. And then finally, if I have no actual authority or apparent authority, so now the third party doesn't believe that I have authority to represent the principal, and I truly don't, now any agreement I make is between me and the third party. This matters because when in a business deal, when the crap hits the fan, you know what that means? When the crap hits the fan, it just occurred to me that's a very English idiom. It means when problems arise, when we have a problem, the question is who's liable for it? Who has to pay for it? And so if you're the agent, you want to be careful that you, A, disclose that there's a principal, and B, you're acting within the authority that the principal has given you. And then you're protected as an agent. Don't act outside of your authority and disclose that you're acting in someone else's behalf. If you're the principal, make sure you appropriately and clearly limit your agent's authority, right? I mean, you might have someone you trust so much, you'll give them complete authority, but that'd be rare, right? I think in marriage, my wife and I have near complete authority to bind each other, right? In other words, I could, if I go take on a debt in Arizona, under Arizona law, she's bound to that debt too. And so, you got to trust people. That's scary. Is it scary? You're like, nah, fine. So that's disclosed principal. The other is what's called an undisclosed or partially disclosed principal. This is where the agent doesn't disclose to the third party that they're representing a principal. So when we have an undisclosed principal and the agent has actual authority, they still have some liability in it because the third party is assuming they're working with the agent. They didn't realize that they were working for someone else. Okay. And when it's outside of our actual authority, again, it's just on us as the agent. Many of us will have opportunities in our life to work in an agent relationship. So what I'm telling you is the thing to remember is disclose the principal. If you're representing someone, let people know they're representing them. In fact, if an attorney ever wants to talk to you, say to ask you questions about their client's case, they will always say, first thing they will say to you, I'm an attorney representing so-and-so. They'll tell you just straight up, I'm not trying to sue another person. I represent this person. And that's because they want to disclose that principle as a matter of the first thing. So that's important. Now, a lot of times that disclosure happens automatically. If you're a clerk and someone walks in the store and wants to buy something and they're dealing with you, they don't really assume they're dealing with you as an individual. They assume that you're a representative of the store. As a representative of the college, I didn't tell you, just so you guys know, I represent EAC. You came to EAC, came in one of our buildings and came into a class and I was like, hey, I'm the teacher. You assumed you would have a hard time saying he never disclosed to us that he was acting as an agent for EAC, right? It's implied in the whole setting. All right. A couple more things and we'll be done. I always tell you that and then I go forever, huh? Sorry. I know you're supposed to, like undersell and over deliver, not the other way around. But all right. So principals are liable for torts. So when there's a master servant relationship and not an independent contractor relationship, and a tort is committed, remember that's a personal harm against somebody, then the principal is liable. So this is kind of where we started with the going to pick up the puppy, okay? The scope, if the servant is doing the master's work, then the master is liable for the servant's work or for any injury that occurs during that. The doctrine legally is called respondeat superior or superior, or however you want to pronounce it. That's a Latin term that means let the master or let the superior answer. So the idea is if Christian's representing me in this deal, then I have to answer for anything that goes wrong in the process. And this, I love this. This is the legal term. We're not liable for torts committed while on frolic. And I don't know where that term, I'm sure it came from some legal case, but like a frolic to me is like just dancing through the field of flowers, right? We're frolicking. The idea is if I send Christian to go pick up that load of lumber for the job we're working on together, and then he decides like, before I go do that, I'm going to go see my girlfriend and then I'm going to go take her off for ice cream and then I'll come back and go. So even though I sent him, if he goes off of that path I sent him on and he gets in a car accident, even if he's driving the company truck, I can make an argument that he was on frolic, meaning not about my business. Make sense? That's pretty logical, I think. So the actions of employees while they're away from the office or company or while doing work for the employer, that's not on frolic, right? If I'm away from the office, but I'm doing work for my boss and I'm somehow negligent, I get in a car accident, is probably the most basic sense of a negligent action, then the employer is still responsible. And then sometimes we can even say, I'll say like my son who's getting ready to go to medical school, right? When you finish medical school, you become what's called a resident. And when you're a resident, they have changed the laws in recent years to limit the number of hours a hospital can work a resident to 90 hours a week. Before that, it was more. Like, that's a lot of hours, right? And so what happens if they work me 90 hours a week, or let's say they work me above the law and they work me 100 hours a week, and then I get off work, no longer on work, I'm driving home, and I get in an accident and harm somebody. Could I say that my employer was working me to exhaustion and that was at least part of the issue here? No, it's clear if my exhaustion leads me to have an accident and hurt somebody, like in the operating room or something, that one, there's no question, the hospital is going to be liable, as well as my personal, me personally, both of us. But a situation where I'm outside of their care now, but I'm exhausted because of them not following their own guidelines, I might have a case there. Most likely the person would sue me, and then I could try to sue the hospital. But now what lawyers would do is say, why don't you just sue both of them, and we'll right, sue the hospital and the guy that ran into you, and we'll see. Yeah, I'm interested to see how the next several years of his life go, because medical school's hard and then residency's hard. Everybody thinks doctors are rich, and they do get rich at some point, but when you got to get there first, and it's like 4 years of regular college, 4 years of medical school, 3 to 4 years of residency. And as a resident, they make decent money, like 50 or 60 grand a year, but not like they're going to make once they're, do you know what an ER doctor makes, like in this area? $350,000 a year. Nice. Slightly more than a college professor, like about triple. All right. That's okay. All right. And then principals are not generally held liable for the torts of independent contractors. The idea is I don't supervise them. I just turn them over to do the job. And so if they do something wrong, that's on them, right? And so that's it. So just again, so the whole idea behind agency law is understanding who represents whom. And mostly is if you're acting as an agent, make sure you disclose to people that you're an agent. You're acting on behalf of a principal. And if you're a principal, make sure you appropriately limit the authority of your agent. Does that make sense? If you do that, that's as much as most business owners need to know. You get beyond that, you're into lawyer territory, and then you hire a lawyer if it ever comes up. All right, any questions? And that's it. You're welcome. A little early today. Ooh, wait. Oh, I forgot to tell my other classes. I have to be in Tucson for FBLA State on Monday. So no class Monday. And for accounting, there'll be no class Monday or Tuesday. Right. All right. You guys are supposed to be sad. You guys are like, yes. I love how our HR person was like, don't just cancel class. They hate it. Find a sub. And I'm like, no, exactly. And what would a sub do?